Welcome back, everybody, to the Aurora Show. So we have finished our, that portion of the archetypal astrology series. I'm definitely going to continue with some series as I think about the archetypes of the planets and, the houses and just kind of really wanting to just bring the human integration, right, of the stars and how we look at astrology and, what it all means. But I did want to, I do have some videos and like niche topics that I do want to cover. And today I really wanted to talk about Uranus's entrance into Gemini. And this is such a broad topic, or like discussion, because Uranus transits every like 7 to 9 years. So this isn't like the craziest thing in the world, but it is very interesting in the context of what we have going on, right? So Pluto has been in Aquarius since January of last year, officially, right? We now have Saturn and Neptune in Aries. And Neptune will be there for like 16 years. Saturn will stay there until 2028. So that's a huge energy. And now we have Uranus entering Gemini this weekend. And so we can see with the outer planets especially, right? Like talking about Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. And I would kind of include Saturn a little bit into these outer planets. But we have sextiles and trines going on, which is really nice. It's better than having squares and oppositions with the outer planets, which create a lot of tension. But we obviously have a very dominant theme here, which is fire and air. And fire and air is can be a little bit of a volatile mix. Obviously, fire represents the spark of life force, its self-will, its creativity, its expression, its power and momentum and action, and it's everything we feel when we think about fire. And air is a very, very versatile element, right? Like air is all about, I believe, air has a lot to do with social structures, right? Like I think the earth element has a lot more to do with like physical structures, physical systems, physical resources, like that sort of thing. And air is really about our social structures, right? Like air is not only how we learn and think and it's information and it's communication, it's the art of how we socialize, it is how we relate, right? From human being to human being. That is air. It's how we create relationships. It's how we create social contracts. It is how we see the overall kind of social structures in societies, in the collective, right? It's about patterns and it's about technology and how we all connect together. And like, those two combinations tells us that like things are going to change rapidly, right? And we know this because we've talked extensively about 2026 being the starting point. It really is like the beginning of the marathon, if you will, of like the transition into a new paradigm. Right? And it's a 1 year, it's a fire horse year. We've got all these outer planets changing signs, which is very, very rare for this all to happen in the same, basically within the same year. To have that Saturn-Neptune conjunction at the 0 degrees of Aries. And at one point last week, we had 7 planets in Aries. Like this is very, this is very kind of unheard of. We don't and this adds to the unknown aspect, right? But I've been thinking a lot about Taurus. And the reason is because of course we've had Uranus in Taurus for the last 8 years, since May of 2018, right? And Uranus disrupts. Uranus is evolution. Uranus wants change. Uranus does not like stagnancy, doesn't like clinging to the status quo. It wants innovation. It wants a little bit of revolution. It wants, us to kind of go outside the box, like be creative, and to not kind of stay stuck in a rut. And Taurus traditionally is a very grounded, immovable sign, right? It is a fixed sign for one, but secondly, it is the only fixed sign that is in the earth element, which makes it extra immovable. It is like a mountain or a massive rock. It is the land itself. It is not easily changeable. It's not easily movable. And so Taurus kind of rules, things in life that are very physical and tangible, right? This is where we get the association of Taurus with like the physical body, right? This is the actual meat suit that we have is very Taurian. Everything that we utilize on a day-to-day basis that is a physical object, that is very Taurian. Food is ruled by Taurus. Land is ruled by Taurus. Agriculture. Housing, I think, can have a few different connotations, but like the physical structures itself, right, can be very Taurus. Money, right? Any type of physical resource, oil, coal, gas, the financial systems, like all of this is wrapped up into Taurus. But I think in more of an emotional aspect, right, more in how we feel about Taurus internally, is it's everything in life that is a solid foundation, right? It especially wherever Taurus rules in your chart, this is the area of life where you crave security. You crave some sort of stability because Taurus is extremely stable. It is a stabilizing force, right? And so whatever area of your chart that Taurus will rule, that's the area where you don't want a lot of change. You're not looking to switch things up and have constant flux. You want things to be stable. You want there to be a foundation. This is the area and the part of our psyches that needs stability and structure, right? And so with Uranus having been there for the last 8 years, we can see how all of these arenas have been heavily disrupted, right? And so I've been talking a lot about this. I've done some updates on this of like, I think when these outer planets shift into new signs, of course, we start to get this new energy, right? We start to get this new focus, this new collective vision. We start to see change on a macro scale in these areas. But I think at the same time, there's a lot of hindsight with the outer planet transits as well. It's like we can't quite see what the previous transit was about. And, we can't really see clearly until the planet's out of that sign, right? So we're getting a lot of hindsight as to what Neptune and Pisces was really about. And the good, the bad, and the ugly of it. And we are seeing a lot of the Pluto and Capricorn transit and like what that was really about and what actually changed, right? And we're going to see that now when Uranus enters Gemini. We're going to get this hindsight, especially with Uranus, right? Because Uranus is very electric. Uranus is a lot about sometimes sudden change, sudden collapses, like things kind of coming out of left field, right? And so I feel like as Uranus is going to enter Gemini this weekend, all of a sudden, even though we are going to be now really focused on this new Gemini era, the conversation around Taurus isn't going to end. And again, we have to look at these transits in context. And so right after Uranus enters Gemini, which we're going to get into all of that, we're going to look at all of that. However, I want to note a few things, right? One is that we have Venus right now conjunct Uranus at the 29th degree of Taurus. Now, she is going to move into Gemini first tomorrow. And then Uranus will follow on Saturday. And so what we're going to do is, this is kind of an ancient astrological method or technique, which is, if you want to look at a certain event or you want to look at how something is going to play out in the future. In ancient astrology, they would do a few things. One is they might look at the chart for the date of that event, right? Or the date of the beginning of that event, which is what we're going to do. We're going to look at the moment that Uranus enters Gemini, and we're going to look at the chart for it, because that's going to tell us a lot about what this transit's going to bring, right? The other method that they would sometimes use is, the moment you have a question about something in the future, you look at the chart of that moment. Or sometimes it was once you receive an answer for a certain question, you would look at the chart for that. So these are kind of like different modalities, different techniques that ancient astrologers would use to try to do predictive astrology, right? And again, I've always said I don't do predictive astrology because I deeply understand that the period of time that we're in right now, the ascension, the transition, is completely unknown. And so it is good for us to look in hindsight and to be able to see patterns that emerge. But I don't really feel strongly that we have the ability to predict the future because it is completely unknown. We're in a chapter of creation where there is no blueprint. And so we don't want to get too stuck in like what we think is going to happen and exactly how it's going to happen. Like, I feel a big theme of Uranus and Gemini is going to have to be, we need to let go of what we think we know. And that's going to be one of the main themes, because Uranus is now disrupting this area and Gemini is about the thought process and ideas and information and intel, right? And it's a very sometimes logical sign, but remember, Gemini is the twins. It's the left and the right brain. So I think that's going to come into focus about how we have to learn how to think differently. We have to incorporate the feminine brain, the intuitiveness, right? The feeling, the sense, the abstractness. We're going to have to really incorporate that into our thinking styles, right? It's no longer going to work to just be logical and analytical and linear about everything. We're going to have to really integrate the left and the right brains. So I think a big theme of Uranus and Gemini is going to be let go of everything that you think you know. I think we're going to go through rapid changes in, what we think. A lot of our beliefs are going to change. Remember, it's opposing Sagittarius. I think we're going to have access to a lot of new types of information, or we're going to, maybe interpret information in a new way. Communication is going to change, and that could mean a lot of different things. Maybe we have new inventions, new innovations around communication. Travel and locality, right, is going to change as well. I also think there's going to be a huge shift in, flexibility and adaptability. Gemini is flexible and adaptable. Gemini can pivot at any moment, right? Which is very different than Taurus. Taurus does not like to pivot, okay? It takes a lot for a Taurus to get off the path they're on and move to another one. It is quite literally like moving a mountain, okay? Gemini will pivot at the slightest, gust of wind, right? So I think there will be some erraticness. I think the nervous system's going to be a little bit disrupted, which is why I've been saying this whole year, we really need to get into the body. And not be so much in here, especially when Uranus does go into Gemini. But, it's interesting to me that we have Venus right now conjunct at the 29th degree of Taurus with Uranus, and Venus is the ruler of Taurus. So at the very end of this 8-year transit, we have the ruler of this transit meeting up with Uranus for this kind of like final meeting, if you will. And then they both move into Gemini together, essentially one day apart, which again kind of signals to us that like there's a message here. And so we're going to get into that. But the reason that I've been thinking a lot about Taurus, and the reason why in the context of the Uranus and Gemini transit, we can't just move on to focusing on Gemini. We obviously will be focusing on a lot of Gemini themes and etc., but we're not done with the Taurus story. And that has become very, very clear to me. Why? So for one is that we have Chiron briefly entering Taurus this year, starting on June 19th and going until September 19th. So there is, similar to last year, right? We had Uranus briefly enter Gemini for a 4-month period and then went back to Taurus. So similar this year, We have Chiron, who has been in Aries for 8 years, also moved in May of 2018. Chiron is going to briefly move into Taurus, and we're going to get an insight and a preview as to the next, I think it's 7 or 8 years that Chiron stays in Taurus. It's an entirely new chapter of collective wound healing. And so we can't just be like, oh, well, Uranus is done with Taurus. We're on to the Gemini, we're on to the Gemini and the Aries and the Aquarius, because the story's not ending. Because Chiron's going to move in there briefly, but will officially move into Taurus in 2027. And then come 2028, Saturn's going to move into Taurus for 2.5, 3 years. So we have a solid 7 or 8 year window here where the story and the focus around Taurus isn't done. It's not even close to done, right? And so I've just been thinking a lot about this because I was trying to feel into the hindsight, right? Hindsight 2020 of what was Uranus and Taurus trying to teach us to prepare us for not only Chiron's entrance into Taurus, but, in 2 years, Saturn's entrance into Taurus. What is the story arc here? And so I have a couple of theories. One is, I think the concept of ownership is going to greatly, greatly change. As I've been sharing, I do think that one of the lessons of Uranus and Taurus, again, this is such a destabilizing transit because Taurus seeks security and Taurus seeks consistency and stability. And then you have Uranus, who is the complete antithesis of that. So to have these two together, it has been incredibly destabilizing for us as human beings. Our reality, right, our physical reality as we know it, was completely unhinged, right? We could no longer find security and stability in the financial system, right? So much has happened, right? We don't trust the financial system anymore. We have also had so many disturbances in food, right? Whether it's food inflation and food costs, or it's food distribution and disruptions to that, or it's the conversation around what's in our food and is this edible? Should we be eating this, right? Taurus also rules the earth, nature. So we've seen so much destabilization with that. The weather patterns have completely changed. We can't rely, right, on the security of predictive weather patterns anymore, right? How they used to be able to predict certain things. It's no longer working. Half the time the weather apps aren't even fucking in tune with what's actually going on. It's oh, it's bright and sunny today, but it's well, I just stepped outside and it feels pretty fucking cold, right? Or it's the weather app says it's supposed to rain and there's not a cloud in the sky. They can't predict things anymore, right? We've had a lot of natural disasters that were, and again, we can have the conversation about are a lot of these things being modified, and there's weather modification or things like that. I'm not opposed to that conversation. I think absolutely we have to take a look at that, but we also have to deal with the reality itself, which is that Mother Earth is in fact changing. The weather is changing, weather is consciousness. The earth is mutating. And so a lot of the things that we had come to rely upon, we can't anymore. We're having big conversations now about resources of the earth. Are they sustainable? Can we keep doing this, right? Should we be relying on coal and oil and gas, right? Is this a sustainable path? Is this harming the earth? There's all these conversations, right? We've obviously seen similar things happening with the housing industry. This isn't sustainable. So a lot of the transit, we had to learn a few things. One is we had a complete overhaul of what we value in the world, what we value and what things are worth, what we are worth, right? Because Taurus is our inherent worth, our inherent prosperity. And so again, we're having all these conversations about like, what is labor worth? What is your time worth? What is your effort worth? What are your skills worth? What are goods and services worth? What is actually valuable and what is not? And how do we even come up with a system of valuation? Right? Like all of this has been in question. And I think also we had to learn we couldn't put our security and stability outside of ourselves. We had to develop it within. So I think one of the things that's going to happen with this transit into Gemini, again, the conversation around Taurus is nowhere near done. So one of the things I'm feeling is there's going to be a huge shift in the concept of ownership. I think because Taurus by nature, kind of can carry an ownership quality to it. Like Taurus really values the things that it has acquired in life, right? So Taurus wants to feel like it has ownership and autonomy over its own body. It wants to feel like it has ownership over certain things. And this can become greed, right? This can become possessiveness. This can become like dominating in some ways. But I think we're going to have a huge conversation about the value of ownership, what ownership is and isn't, what people can and cannot own. Like, I feel like that's going to be a huge conversation because with Uranus and Gemini, remember, Gemini is about adaptability and flexibility. And so in the age of Taurus, and especially with Uranus there, I think what happened also is because everything was so destabilized and everything was so in flux, it couldn't be relied upon. What we saw was a huge trend in people trying to own more things, right? It was like, oh, you need to own a house and you need to own your car. You know, we need to own gold and silver. We need to own crypto. We need to own stock options. Like everything kind of became of like, we were almost trying to cling to anything external to give us some sense of security. And I just think that that conversation is going to change and we're going to view things a little bit differently because, you know, I think one of the things is that I feel there will be a conversation about what people can and cannot own, right? Like, you know, interestingly, Uranus was in Gemini during the Civil War. Okay. What was the Civil War about? The Civil War was about the ownership of slaves. So even though Uranus was in Gemini, it was still kind of linking back to Taurian themes, right? Which is the body, labor, work, effort. So the question became, can you own a person? Can you do that, right? And that is essentially what we got with the Civil War, was an argument and a war over whether or not you could own a person. And you can own someone's labor and you can own someone's time, right? I do feel we are, not to say we are going to have another civil war. I don't predict that, and I don't necessarily feel that that's the case. But with, again, we have to look at the stars in context. With Neptune and Saturn and Aries, with Pluto and Aquarius, I do feel there is going to be a great revolution around every individual human wanting to have autonomy, right, over their own body, their labor, their time, their effort, their skills, right? We're coming out of a big era where, you know, we've basically been, you know, in a way, we're still in slavery, right? We're selling our bodies, you know, that could be literal, right? Or figurative. But in many ways, we've sold our bodies, right? We've sold our time and our labor and our effort and our skills for money, for security, for stability. I think there's going to be a huge question mark around that, right? And again, what we're worth, what people are worth, what humanity's creativity is worth, right? What people's skill sets are. And remember, in the age of Pluto and Aquarius, this also has a lot to do with frequency. What is our frequency worth, right? Because you could have two people doing the same exact thing, having the equal level of skills, equal level of gift, but one person is in a much higher frequency, than the other. What is that worth? Right? These are a lot of conversations. I think we're also going to see a trend in, hopefully, like a discussion around the fact that we cannot own the earth, right? Like there is no reason on God's green earth that we should be paying money for water. That's insanity, right? That anybody gets to own resources that are naturally produced by the earth. It might even lead to a conversation about land itself. Like, can we actually own land? And again, I'm not proposing one way or the other. I just think that this is a conversation. You know, we kind of have become very colonize-esque, right? Of like, we need to own land, and this is my land, and this is my this. And it's like, I don't know, like, can we own the earth? Right? Like, and the, you know, this even goes into the question marks about, you know, countries itself, like countries owning land. And I think especially with Saturn and Aries and Neptune and Aries, it's this question of like, you know, are we citizens of the earth and citizens, right, of the world? Or are we like tied into this box of like, this is our nationality and this is where we come from? And, you know, it's a lot of things intertwined, I think. And so we might find that actually moving out of this era, that people might start to have a different viewpoint where it might actually be more valuable, right, to be more adaptable, to be more flexible. It might become actually more of a liability, if you will, to have all your eggs in one basket, right? Like you can only do one thing, one job, one role. Whereas I do feel Uranus and Gemini is going to want us to expand our skill sets, expand our knowledge, expand our wisdoms, to have many, many gifts, many different skills that we can kind of pivot and adapt to being in many different types of roles. I think that's going to be interesting. It also might be that people might find value in more of the freedom of travel and the freedom of movement rather than being tied down to one specific place. And because when you own something, you are in many ways, like when you own something, that thing, that or whatever, also owns you, right? So for instance, a house, right? And this is a huge conversation that millennials, right, I think have been having in the United States, because our generation was probably one of the first in modern times who really, the kind of American dream of owning a home and a white picket fence and getting, you know, severance packages and 401ks and all this shit. It was like, that's not a reality for us, okay? We can't rely on those things. We also are the Pluto and Scorpio generation, which opposes Taurus. So we kind of innately understand that none of this is guaranteed. And we aren't going to rely on this because none of this that has been promised has been delivered, right? And so the conversation has also been like, well, I've seen a lot of people who have been coming out and just being honest of like, is owning a home beneficial, right? Like it in modern times, everything is built like shit. I think that's also going to be another topic of discussion, of the fact that we have built everything to fail and we have not built anything to be sustainable and to actually last. And then you have property taxes, and some people are getting priced out of their homes, right? Even though they might own the home outright, but all of a sudden, all these inflated property prices, right? Everything is getting appraised higher and higher and higher in this infinite up, which again isn't sustainable either. So there are people literally losing their homes after they might have spent their entire life paying off this home to own it, but they don't actually fucking own it because they can still lose it If, let's say, the property taxes skyrocket, let's say insurance skyrockets, which is already happening because of so many natural disasters, because of the changing landscape, right? Insurance is skyrocketing. So what if you can't afford the insurance anymore? People who live in POAs or HOAs, right? You can still be foreclosed on in your home that you own if you miss a payment on an HOA or POA, right? You could have someone who's been paying off their home for 20 years. Let's say they have a 30-year mortgage and they're 20 years in, right? They've spent God knows how much money, depending on their interest rate, that they've actually paid. But let's say they lose their job, or a family member is sick, or they have medical bills, or something happens, right? Life happens, and they get behind on the mortgage. They can lose that house. We actually don't own anything. And that was the lesson of Uranus and Taurus. We actually don't own anything. But I think the beauty of that is, and what Uranus and Gemini is going to teach us, is that we can't actually own anything in creation. But also that means nothing owns us. Nothing owns us to the point where our power is being given outwardly to this thing, right? Again, in the example of the house, if you've put that much work and effort into it and that much time and you've been paying off all this stuff, well, guess what? Stuff goes wrong in the house, stuff breaks. You got to keep fixing it. You got to keep replacing it. It now owns you, right? It's nobody else's responsibility. You're the one that has to take care of it now. So I feel like there's going to be this huge shift culturally of like, do we actually want to have freedom? And is there freedom in ownership? Or not, right? And again, I don't know the answers to this, but I do see this coming. It's going to be a huge question mark of like, does owning anything actually benefit us, right? Is it blocking the natural flow of like where, all energy wants to be in motion. So it's like things want to move. We want to move. Like humans need to move. Objects, and they are also sentient, right? They want to be free also. I don't think things want to be owned either, right? Because every object on this planet is sentient in a way. Like, not saying it has like full consciousness like a human being, but it is made up of spirit. It is made up of the exact same atoms that are in your body, right? So can we really own anything? And is there going to be actually more freedom in the fact of being adaptable and flexible and letting things come and go and not trying to hold on to anything? Like, this could radically change a lot of things, right? And when Chiron enters Taurus, we're going to get a brief preview of this new wound healing cycle that collectively we're going to be in. So I'm so sorry for the Taurus placements. I mean, I don't think that this is bad. I do feel for the Taurus placements because, and Scorpio, all the fixed signs, if you have a lot of fixed energy, because of course the Taurus placements, you're not getting a break. You're really not, you can't catch a fucking break. I think every sign has gone through it. So you're really not alone. Like, we've all gotten hit in different ways. But I do feel for you because Uranus being in your sign for 8 years, and it's really disruptive, again, to your natural archetype of stability, has been very tough. And now having Chiron enter Taurus, and then Saturn will enter Taurus in 2 years. So I really feel for the Taurus placements because the saga isn't over, okay? But the good news is that whatever Uranus taught us was preparing us for this. And so Chiron and Taurus, collectively, we're going to now be dealing with different types of wounds. There's going to be deep collective wounds triggered around scarcity, resources, money, the body, food. Like, the story's not done. And so I don't know how this is going to play out, but I feel maybe it's going to be a huge healing moment for how much survival we've all been in. And there might be moments of like maybe little survival scares, right? Where we kind of have to sit with those triggers and sit with those wounds and allow them to heal. Again, I think it's going to bring up the wounds around ownership. It's going to bring up the wounds around having autonomy over our own bodies and our time and our labor. Like, there's going to be a lot of that. And don't forget, as soon as Chiron enters Taurus, it's going to come up with a square to Pluto and Aquarius. And so it affects the larger scale, right? Pluto and Aquarius is doing a huge transformation on the collective consciousness, on authenticity, on humanitarianism, on society structures, on the idea of equality, right? And so those two are going to be squaring essentially the whole time that Chiron is in Taurus for those 4 months. So this is going to be a global crisis of some kind. And again, I don't mean to say it in a crisis as like in a bad way. It's just, it's going to bring up these very strong triggers and feelings because there's something we need to heal, and we need to figure out how we're going to move forward. We need to figure out how resources are actually supposed to be utilized. I think Pluto and Aquarius with this square is going to say the Pluto and Aquarius is power of the people, right? It's the power of humanity. In a square to Chiron and Taurus, I think that this is where we need to step up, and it's going to be our job as a humanity. And again, Uranus and Gemini rules local communities. I think there's going to be a huge push for local communities to start building their own economies, like new types of economies, like maybe everybody's going to find new and inventive ways to actually share resources, food distributions, how to create stability and security for humanity and for people. What things are worth will be reevaluated, how we exchange currencies, like all of that's going to come into play, but I think it's going to have that very Pluto and Aquarius tone, which is this good for the whole? Does this work sustainably as a society? Does this create equal power for all people? Yeah, it's just going to be really interesting. And so, I was looking back at the last time Chiron was in Taurus. So again, for those of you not only that have Taurus placements, but especially those of you who will be entering your Chiron return, if you have Chiron in Taurus, this is a very personal healing moment for you as well. So the last time Chiron was in Taurus was 1976 to 1983, and we saw a few things happening here. Okay, this is some of the bad stuff, I guess you could say, but it's just the reality, right? And we're not predicting that this is going to replay itself, but it is patterns that we need to understand. So there was the famous Argentina's Dirty War. This was basically like a very brutal war where there was a lot of kind of really dark things going on, like torture and kidnapping and things of that nature. But about 30,000 people disappeared during this war. So again, Chiron and Taurus, physical bodies, right? We had the end of the golden age of the post-war growth, because there was a huge boom of growth after the war. And so we saw a huge rise of inflation and just people not having access to resources, not having savings. Now, again, I don't say this to scare anybody, because the difference here, right? Again, we have to look at context. We've just had Uranus there for 8 years. So a lot of maybe the learning lessons and the things that happened during this last Chiron and Taurus era, if we didn't have Uranus and Taurus the last 8 years, it would probably be a bit of a rougher transit with Chiron here. But we have been prepared for a lot of these things. We have already begun the healing process, if you will. So I don't feel like it's going to be as extreme. But again, Neptune and Saturn and Aries, Pluto and Aquarius, it is going to call for a much more autonomous, forward-thinking, humanitarian-based systems that have to do with resources and the sharing of resources. We had the IMF crisis in the UK. Great Britain basically had to borrow huge amounts of money from the IMF because they were essentially bankrupt. We had, let's see, we did have a lot of uprisings, especially in South Africa, for instance. This was a huge uprising against apartheid, right? Again, kind of a similar thing that I mentioned after Uranus was in Gemini during the Civil War. It had some post Uranus and Taurus themes, which was, can you own people? And Chiron and Taurus here in this era, the question and the revolt in South Africa were about apartheid, of the separating of people, right? The separation of bodies. We had also some, because Taurus is the body, right? There was some kind of big things that happen in terms of diseases and things that affect the body, right? So 1976 was the first Ebola outbreak that occurred, and that was like a huge, crazy thing in the world. We also saw the World Health Organization start to really kind of expand in their like infrastructure in terms of like global disease tracking and things like that. And then of course in the early 80s, we had the AIDS epidemic begin. So again, I'm not saying this is going to repeat. I'm just saying these are some of the themes, right, that have occurred. Now, I feel this will be, again, we need to look at everything in context. I don't feel these things repeating, also because we already went through the 2020 pandemic shit. Like, I think people are over that kind of scare. Like, they're just not buying it anymore. It's just really not going to be a thing. We've had the South Node in Virgo for over a year, so everybody's been hit super hard with health and wellness, taking care of their bodies, like dealing with symptoms and illnesses. Like, we've been in this for a while. So what I feel personally, this is just my visions, is we're going to be having more of conversations around how things are affecting the body. Not so much talking about diseases and outbreaks and things of that nature, although maybe that happens. I think it's going to be more around the conversation of how are things like weather modification affecting the human body? How have all the things we've been doing to food and land affecting the body? Pesticides, right? Antibiotics, all the things we're injecting into our food. How that is now affecting the human body, right? And obviously these aren't new talking points per se, but they are going to become super focused on, right? How are chemicals that are in every single product affecting our body? How are the clothes we wear affecting our body, right? Like, a lot of people talk about linen and 100% cotton and silk and how these are the highest frequencies, things like that. I think textiles, right? It's going to become a huge conversation around like all the things that have damaged the human body and what are we going to do about it, right? And again, also all the things that we've done to damage the earth. And what are we going to do about it? So it feels like there is going to be a very global push towards more organic, holistic, natural, sustainable living, how we live in harmony with the earth and ourselves, the questions around ownership, what is valuable, what are things worth, what can you own? What is ownable? Is owning anything beneficial? What does this mean for us as human beings, right? I think the freedom of travel is going to become a big topic, okay? Like, you know, that as humans, we should be able to roam the earth as we see fit, right? It's like in ancient times, they just went wherever they wanted, you know? Or you could be like fucking Christopher Columbus, who quote unquote discovered a land that was already inhabited by indigenous people and steal it from them, right? Like it's this whole thing of like, what are we doing, right? Like, can the earth be owned? Can we prevent human beings from traveling the planet that they live on and restricting everybody in that way? It's going to be very interesting. So this brings me to looking at the exact chart for the entrance of Uranus into Gemini. Again, sometimes doing this as a technique can kind of give us some insight as to the way in which the entire transit is going to work. Okay. So if we look at the exact time, now this is going to be April 25th. So this is going to be Saturday. And it's going to occur around 10:51 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Is when Uranus is going to enter Gemini. So the evening of Saturday night. Now, we will have the sun at 5 degrees Taurus. Okay, so that's going to be the only Taurus. Let me double check. That's going to be the only Taurus energy at the beginning of that transit. So the sun, 5 degrees Taurus, 5 degrees is a Leo degree. So it's kind of shining a very bright light on the Taurus energy. Now we are going to have the moon at 0 degrees of Virgo, which is interesting. So the moon at 0 degrees Virgo is like 0 degrees is very potent, right? It is the seed of the beginning. So emotionally, this tells me that this transit has a lot to do. It must have a lot to do with healing. Okay, now the south node is in Virgo and will be at 6 degrees Virgo. So the moon and the south node will be conjunct one another. A loose conjunction, but a conjunction. So this tells us that there will be something to do around we're having to heal around, like our health and wellness is going to be a huge factor to this. I think there's going to be some type of like deep purging and letting go. Also, right? Virgo can be very, very analytical and very overly logical. And with the south node on the moon, it's kind of telling us like, you have to let go of that, right? That's very on par with Uranus and Gemini of like, you have to let go of this over analyzation, this over linear thinking, like, looking at everything through this kind of logical lens. And you're going to have to be very open to learning new things, very open to changing your mind, very open to new information. But that south node on the moon is like, oof, this feels like a very, something that is detoxing. Like we are going through a huge kind of detox of something. And again, after the Uranus and Taurus era, looking at Chiron entering Taurus, I do feel like there's going to be this huge conversation around how we have been poisoning our bodies and the earth. And so that maybe could line up with this. Now, Mercury will be in Aries, okay? So Mercury will be in Aries, conjunct Mars in Aries. So our thoughts are going to be very aligned with our actions for this 8-year transit. Like we want to be autonomous. We want to be sovereign. We also are going to have a very quick translation time between the idea, the thought, the urge, the instinct, and acting upon it. So again, this tells us that this is going to be a very fast-paced transit. Like things are just going to be happening like this, okay? It's a rapid fire, if you will. Now, Neptune, of course, will also be in Aries. It's just going to be at an earlier degree, so it isn't going to be involved with Mercury or Mars. Chiron will still be at 27 degrees Aries as well. And then we also, of course, have Saturn in Aries, which will be at 8 degrees. So kind of still in a conjunction with Neptune and in a slight conjunction with Saturn, but not a strong conjunction. So it does tell us that there will be kind of our actions are going to be potent. Okay, 8 degrees Aries, that's a Scorpio degree. Our actions are going to be very potent during this time. And Jupiter will still be in Cancer at 18 degrees, which means that Jupiter will be squaring Mercury at 17 degrees Aries. So we also could find that people are a little bit emotionally volatile. There is some sometimes when we are too much in the feeling of something, or on a beneficial note with a square like that, we're going to really be willing to fight for what we care about. Like we are going to double down and we are going to fight for what we truly care about. But this could also mean that people can be a little bit volatile, a little bit unhinged when things they care about are threatened. So this is a volatile time. The nervous systems are going to be high. The rapid fire is going to be there. And so again, moon at 0 degrees Virgo with the South Node, we do really have to drop into the body. We have to stay very grounded. Sun will be in Taurus, thank God. So we do have to still stay very much rooted. And Pluto will be at 5 degrees Aquarius. So Pluto 5 degrees Aquarius in an exact square with the Sun in Taurus. This is what I'm telling you guys. This whole transit is going to bring up huge things around all the themes I mentioned and about how this affects humanity, about our social structures, about what is fair, what is equality, what is authentic, what is real. I think there is going to be a new economy. I don't know. I'm going to do a separate video talking about the financial system and, you know, kind of like the blueprint of money and also the blueprint of some alternative forms of currency that we currently have, and just maybe discussing like how we feel, you know, because again, I think we are co-creating this as we go. So maybe discussing like what it looks like to move into a new form of currency. But this is talking about the actual infrastructure of that. This is talking about the economy, which is different than currency. So human beings are the economy. Humanity is the economy. And we have to remember that power. We are the currency. We are the economy. We are the creators. And so I feel like this tension between Pluto in Aquarius and the Sun at 5 degrees Taurus, there's going to be a new economy, and it's a human economy. And it's very much based on self-autonomy. It's very much based on authenticity and frequency. And it's very much based on, obviously, I think, the healing of the earth, the healing of our bodies, returning to a very moon in Virgo. Virgo is, at its best, the most natural, purified, holistic baseline, right? And then Taurus is where we get the idea of things that are just very organic, meaning that they are very in tune with nature, right? They're just very organic. And so I feel like this says it's going to be a huge focus on restoring the health and wellness of our bodies, our relationship with the earth, and returning to a very organic economy. Maybe that's barter and trade. Maybe that's local economy. I think there's going to be a huge surge in like handmade goods again, things of that nature. And then of course you have the Uranus at 0 degrees Gemini. So it's off to the races. Like this is a whole new ball game. We're going to be discovering things as we go. And of course, Venus will be conjunct Uranus. So Venus will be at 2 degrees, which is a Taurus degree. Like you really can't make this stuff up sometimes. Venus will actually be at 2 degrees and 22 seconds. So 222. And that is a Taurus degree. And of course, because they're entering together, right, it tells us that this is also going to greatly change relationship dynamics, right? And I think, because Venus is what we value, okay? That's why she's the ruler of Taurus. And so we're going to value, we're no longer going to put value in necessarily things and resources and money the same way we did before. And maybe we're not putting so much value on like what we own and how much we have and how much we make. Instead, it's telling us Venus is at a Taurus degree. Okay. So we are talking about what we consider worth something, but with the conjunction to Uranus and Gemini, what we value now is freedom. And freedom means flexibility. Freedom is information. Freedom is communication. So we are going to have this whole new value system where maybe we value ideas. Maybe we value people's wisdoms and information that they have to share. And that becomes the most valuable thing. Now, in the chart of this exact moment, Venus and Uranus in their conjunction in the chart happen to be in the 7th house of relationships, which the 7th house of relationships is ruled by Libra, who is the other domicile of Venus. So she's at 2 degrees, which is a Taurus degree. That's one of her rulerships, in the 7th house of Libra, which is her other rulership. Okay, so this tells me that the flow of information, the flow of how we socialize, how we share, that's going to be a huge theme. It's going to be all about the sharing of information and teaching. I think we're going to really value information. We're going to value those that have the wisdom, have the knowledge, have the information. We're going to value people's ideas. We're going to value flexibility. We're going to value movement and travel over stable security that maybe is very, very fixed, right? Very interesting. Now, there is a massive stellium here in the 5th house of the chart with Mercury and Mars and Saturn and Neptune and Chiron and Aries. Now, the 5th house is the house of Leo. This is about joy. This is about our passions in life, right? This is like the ultimate kind of like inner child healing. It is the pure joy of self-expression. It is the pure joy of following our creative instincts, of going in the direction of what excites us, of what inspires us, of what lights us up. So to have that massive stellium of the Aries planets in the 5th house of the chart tells us that we're just going to be following what we love. Like everybody is no longer going to do shit that they hate. To do things that don't bring them joy, that don't allow for their self-expression, for their autonomy, things that don't make us happy. We're just not interested. And also the moon in Virgo conjunct the South Node is in the 10th house here, right? And so the 10th house of like career and mission and purpose, again, I think we're all going to share in this desire to build a sustainable legacy, right? That we are going to heal ourselves and we're going to heal the earth. And this will become a very, very big purpose. We're also going to be shedding this idea of trying to overthink the future, of trying to control things, and trying to make everything perfect all the time. Now, Pluto, right, who's at 5 degrees of Aquarius, is going to be in a square to the sun in Taurus at 5 degrees, and those are Leo degrees. Okay. So this links us back to this giant stellium in the 5th house. We are going to build this new human economy based on joy, based on self-expression, based on creativity. Now, Pluto in the chart is in the 3rd house. The 3rd house is ruled by Gemini. So it is bringing the power of the spreading of information to all of humanity. So this could really increase the spread of information. We might have new forms of communication. Maybe social media becomes something different, but there is a power in not only the sharing, because the 7th house is one-on-one, right? So there is this power of sharing information one-on-one, building relationships, having this freedom of socialization and movement. But then there's also a great power in the information being spread to all of humanity, for everybody to have access, right? Squaring the sun at 5 degrees of Taurus in the 6th house of health and wellness and daily routines. So we have to find daily routines and health and wellness where we're healing our bodies through this. We are going back to some sort of very organic, natural way of living that benefits all. Very interesting stuff here. So that's the chart of the moment Uranus enters Gemini. And so again, this is going to happen this Saturday. And then I think we will come to talk about Chiron entering Taurus. And of course, Saturn eventually entering Taurus. But this is really setting us up for quite an experience this year. I am excited for this transit, I will say. I think Uranus does a lot better here than it does in Taurus. And for those of you who have Gemini placements, especially any early degree Gemini placements, you're going to feel a huge surge in energy. So it is really important for us to regulate our nervous systems, to find anchored and rootedness in the body, and that will be a huge theme. But yeah, I will talk more about this in my May astrology gathering, which will be this Sunday, the day after Uranus moves in to Gemini. So for those of you who want to join that, and of course I'll be doing more updates as we go. But I love you guys. Thanks for watching.